Myself and Dan McDonald causing trouble and getting yourselves on the back pages of the papers this morning.
It's great to be on the back page rather than the front, obviously. But yeah, so abuse of RTE staff at LOI grounds crosses the line from Declan McBennett. This was an interview that Declan gave with the LOI Central podcast yesterday. And yeah, now to be fair, in the context of the interview, I think we spoke for maybe an hour and 10 minutes, and he brought it up at the end, and he didn't bring it up as if this were a major talking point. But Dan has obviously gone with it as his major talking point from the piece.
Okay, so what is it? Tell us what's going on.
So, and I suppose in the years that I've been following the League of Ireland, RT's coverage has always been a bit of an issue, whether rightly or wrongly. And I think sometimes League of Ireland fans have unrealistic ambitions in terms of media coverage. I think in general the media coverage, and especially in newspapers, isn't bad. But this year, with the League of Ireland teams doing so well in Europe, particularly Bohemians, one game was shown by RT out of 20. And that was that really irked League of Ireland fans, particularly.
What is it like? What is it that irks them about showing one game out of 20?
Well, RT would argue that it's going to show the champions Shamrock Rovers. Now, it had issues with showing the Shamrock Rovers games in the Champions League because of the Olympics, and there was some other issue as well, which I actually forget now. But Bohemians went on this amazing run, and the game was on in the Aviva Stadium. I think that's the important point. And Declan McBennett brought up a lot of stats in terms of the viewing figures for League of Ireland games. But when AC Milan played Shamrock Rovers, there was, I can't exactly remember, there was in the region of 220 to 250,000 people watching that game. A League of Ireland game could be like an eighth of that, or even a tenth of that, maybe at times if it's particularly low. So he made the point that people do want to watch games in Europe, but I asked him what can the League of Ireland do to improve, and his first point was facilities, and my point was, well then why not show Bowes in the Aviva Stadium, because it looks great. And there was an issue with Bowes over Bowes apparently offering the game to RT for free, and he brought that up and said that wasn't really the case. But I think that incurred a lot of anger in the League of Ireland, and this then kind of resulted in, as he pointed out, or he alleges, and I've no reason not to believe him, that some RT staff were actually abused at League of Ireland grounds.
Okay. Is there a quote about that?
Yeah, so he said, RT is not immune from criticism. I'm not immune from criticism. There's an argument there should be criticism, and that's rightly so, but there's also a line with regard to that criticism. That line has been overstepped this season with regard to some of the chanting and some of the behaviour with regard to RT personnel on site and people who are engaged by RT who are not necessarily RT staff. There are a number of examples over the last couple of weeks where some of those who have been operating for RT, not necessarily RT staff or working with RT, have felt uncomfortable at best with regard to some of the behaviour that is emanating out of the stands. That's a very serious point. He did make the point that there was like a freelancer, I think, who got the brunt of it as well. I'm not going into the specifics, but there are two recent games. Sections of fans have their chance, and that's fine. It stays at chanting. If it stays at chanting and stays against a corporate entity, then that's one thing. When it starts to target individuals, or when it starts to make people feel uncomfortable when they're doing their professional duty and covering the league that everyone argues should be covered, needs to be covered, and deserves to be covered, that crosses the line. I'm not holding clubs responsible for their fans. That was in response to a question I said, well, did you report this to the clubs? Made the point, obviously, about the Hungarian FA of late and so forth. The clubs have been contacted, and the FAI have been contacted. We're not dealing with snowflakes here. Probably not the best terminology. There are people who go about their daily work and understand the nature of the atmosphere when it takes into them, but there are lines that cannot be crossed.
So I hadn't heard that individuals were being targeted. What he says the corporate entity. What is being chanted?
I think his line was that RT had replaced the FAI in the FUCK or whatever, RT. So there were chants. I mean, I don't think we can get too high and mighty about chants at a football game. In general, League of Ireland games aren't that bad for that stuff, but there was a lot of animosity towards RT this year because it was basically ignoring the great European stuff.
And is there a view amongst the League of Ireland fans that other sports are getting preferential treatment?
Oh, totally, yeah. Obviously, he would be seen as coming from a Gaelic Games background in Monaghan. Now, I kind of think that's not really relevant, and he made the point that Ryle Nugent before him was seen as a rugger bugger or whatever, and he's seen as a ga-head, so to speak. And I did point out that he doesn't, I don't think he's much love for the League of Ireland, but he said that's not relevant. He said, I'm basically here to show the best of Irish sport and so on and so forth. But League of Ireland fans would point out, I think 15 games in the season, including 3 in the Cup. And they would show, RT would show like 6 games early on in the season. So effectively, if they showed the first 6 games, that leaves 6 games over the following 30. So like you just miss a massive section of the season. So I think they could cover it better. But RT is losing an awful lot of money, and he argues that they don't have the money.
Yeah, they've obviously got the money to invest in Champions League rights, and they've got the money to invest in rugby, and obviously they show the underage rugby national team a significant portion, and we were always told that those rights were bundled with the senior national side, and then they lost the senior national side and they continued to show the underage stuff. So I guess that's where the League of Ireland fans' questions are coming from. It's always felt that, do you remember, obviously you do remember Delaney talking about the League of Ireland being the problem child. It's always, I
think, it's the difficult child.
The difficult child.
Yeah.
It's always felt a little bit like RTE feel the same
I feel
about
that.
the League of Ireland.
I feel that. Now, as I pointed out to him, I write match reports for RTE's website, and I'm very happy to get that work, and I think RTE Online does a very good job. But
go on.
But in terms of in terms of their football coverage, the thing that always perplexes me about RTE, and I studied journalism in college, and we probably spoke about this a lot. It's a mixed model, so it's not, to me, it's kind of neither one nor the other. And if you listen to the interview with Declan McBennett, he almost at one point will say, well, the viewing figures aren't what it's about, or we're not beholden to the viewing figures. But then he'll talk about the viewing figures. So he'd basically say, well, if League of Ireland games were getting 100,000 plus, we'd be shown more. But the recent game, Sligo and Pats, was something like 30,000 or that. And in fairness, I will make the point that if you show a map of Ireland by a county by county basis, there's a massive part of Leinster going into Tipperary, into Munster, where there are no League of Ireland clubs. So there isn't necessarily a national interest when there's a League of Ireland game on. I think there's a national interest. Remember Dundalk in 2016 when some of the pubs were shown Dundalk over Manchester United in the Europa League. I think there is an interest when Irish clubs play in Europe, but there isn't really an interest, and facilities are quite bad at times. So that's something the League of Ireland needs to look at. But I do think, and in fairness to him, I will say one thing. He did say the product is good. Like, he wasn't knocking the actual product on the pitch, and I think in terms of the clubs, what they're doing, and managers and players, they can take satisfaction in the fact that the head of RTE, who probably previous heads of RTE thought it was crap, does not think it's crap. He actually thinks it's a good product, but he thinks they need to improve the standards of the grounds.
It's all well and good saying that, though, Johnny, isn't it? Because you've got to back that up with the investment in it. Like, that bit where it's not their job to fix the league is fair enough, but actually there needs to be some kind of sense of responsibility to the domestic national football product, as opposed to it being an add-on. Or
an public service broadcaster,
as opposed to being an add-on or an adjunct to the rights for the national team. Because like, anybody who knows anything about football has come to the conclusion that without a strong league, football in Ireland is screwed for the next 20, 30, 40 years, until we actually establish a professional league which is run professionally. Like, a lot of this is chicken and egg. It won't build an audience if it's never on, and if it's never on at the same time, it won't build an audience, and it won't increase the ability of the teams to generate sponsorship because they're never on TV, and that means they won't have any funding to improve their stadiums, and so it will look crap the 3-4 times a year that it's on. And so, instead of actually kind of saying, it's not about the viewership now. Look, I haven't heard the whole hour-long interview. It's not about the viewership, but it kind of is about the viewership. What's our role as a national broadcaster? What's our role as taxpayers in helping this? Because bear in mind, the taxpayer is footing the bill for the Champions League rights, which is going to pay Ronaldo's wages. That's how that whole thing works. All the national broadcasters, all the broadcasters who pay for it, and we're the ones who are footing the bill for the GA rights, and we're the ones who are footing the bill for the rugby rights as well. And now the taxpayer is involved in this experiment around the streaming service for the rugby championship, which it's an interesting model, and we'll see if it works. I wonder what the risk that we as taxpayers are taking on. I wonder what our guarantees are. It'd be very interesting to see what the finances and how that actually all pans out. So, and I'm sure that takes up a lot of time and energy and effort for the organisation. You know, again, that's helping to grow South African rugby, and maybe that's exactly the right thing for the national broadcaster and for the taxpayer to be getting involved in. But it seems like there's just a gap in the responsibility here. Like either they are responsible or they're not, and if they're not, fair enough. But this kind of half in, half out isn't working for anybody.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the fact RT is a mixed model. It's like it doesn't like.
Explain what you mean by mixed model.
Well, it's not a BBC in that the BBC doesn't have ads obviously on its channels. Like, so RT has ads. It also has like really annoying ads at times on the RT player. So it's a public service broadcaster at one level. So it gets funding that obviously the likes of Virgin doesn't get, but at the same time it's beholden to advertisers. So it doesn't effectively show much League of Ireland because not enough people watch it, and it's as simple as that, really. But I made the point as well that if they show 15 League of Ireland games in the season, there's no magazine show at all around soccer on RT. Nothing. There's no highlight show anymore. They ditched Soccer Republic, which was literally allowed, in my view, to run into the ground. There's no show around like even English football, Champions League. There's nothing on RT now apart from live soccer. Nothing else. Whereas you have Against the Head, the Sunday game, so on and so forth. And I just think that's odd. But he made the point that nobody watches anymore, and he said highlight shows are basically dead apart from the Sunday game and Match of the Day. He said nobody cares on a Monday anymore. He said they don't care within an hour of the game because they've already seen it. And obviously there's a bigger point there about streaming and people watching things on their phones and people, you know, Netflix winning all the awards now rather than traditional media and all that. But I don't know, I still think there are a lot of stories within Irish football that just aren't told by RT. Did
you come away from this enthusiastic and hopeful about what the future of the League of Ireland on the national broadcaster might look like?
No, not at all. I mean, Declan was at a stretch to say like the coverage would be as good next year, and wasn't entirely ruling out that it'd be less. So no, I wasn't. But I don't know, we as a league have to, Stephen Bradley spoke about doing things ourselves, and I will say one thing about Declan McBennett. I was desperately disappointed in the take-up of LOI TV. I think League of Ireland fans let themselves down there during the pandemic when effectively they were offered like every game for, I think it was of 60 quid or something, and the take-up was poor. And I think when they weren't spending any money on the football club, they could have been a lot better than that. It was pittance, and a lot of people didn't subscribe. So, I mean, that's their choice, but that definitely didn't endear the League of Ireland to RTE.